Welcome to another episode of Amplified Marriage. Today we're talking about, do you effectively communicate?
Welcome to Season 2, Episode 1 of Amplified Marriage. I'm Natalie.
And I'm Brian. We are so glad that you could listen. You can join in from wherever you are.
We've missed you. We're back.
We missed you, and we just wanted to say a big thank you to everyone who's listening and sharing and downloading.
Yeah.
We really do appreciate it. We had no idea that once we got going on this, it would be something that a lot of people were involved in. We found out that people at our church are using it as a tool for their marriage life group.
Yeah, that's...
No pressure.
It's a little. I told Brian that. Well, they're going to learn a lot about us, and I don't know how I feel about that.
Yeah, so they're going to either look at us differently or be like,
That's
"Oh man,
right.
you're okay."
Yeah.
So we just really appreciate all the support and the fact that people are finding value in this. That's really our goal. Is that when people find the value, that means it's helping them. And really, that's
right.
all our goal is, to help people in their marriage, because we really do believe that marriage is important, and then it can be successful and
Absolutely.
you can thrive in that
Yes.
relationship. So
That's right. We've survived marriage far too long. Now it's time to thrive.
Absolutely. So wherever you are, whatever you're doing, as we always say, have a seat, grab a coffee, drink a tea, get comfy as we move on to the next part of our podcast. And so what we're talking about, we have been picking apart some of these questions and some of the things that we've run into talking with couples in the last few weeks, is we're actually going to break down today some of the different communication styles.
Yes.
So what that means is something that Ellie and I learned earlier on in our relationship, probably actually when we were doing pre-marriage counseling.
Oh, gosh. Yep.
No,
actually, we didn't learn the love languages until years into our marriage. It probably would have helped. Like the things that be encouraged, because where we're coming from, being 19 years married, these are things that would have really helped make
things a little smoother.
Yeah. And I don't know about easier, because marriage takes work and sometimes it's easy and sometimes it's not, but it would have really aided in clarifying some of the issues that we had in communicating, had we known that there were different love languages.
The five love languages, really, we're going to leave a link in the show notes to go to. It's by Gary Chapman. We took it every time we lead a marriage group. We have everyone take it so we know what we're speaking in for the first time in 19 years.
That's right. We are the same.
And what is it?
Quality time.
You almost forgot what that was. You've been praying for this, that we would be the same. You're what was mine before that you hated so much?
Acts of service. It was acts of service for years. And I kept praying every time we did. And we would do this like twice a year. And that's the thing. It's not just a one and done. You really, as you know, if you're just newlyweds and then, you know, you're married for a little bit, it's going to change.
Well, as you mature.
As you mature and as you add kids onto there, your needs change.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think ours have changed because our kids are older. My oldest son is able to look after the other two. Yeah. And so we actually have more free time to actually spend with each other.
And when our kids were babies and little kids, mine was acts of service for years.
Yeah, I did a lot of laundry.
Right? And so it's great to have quality time, but our version of quality time is totally different.
So the love language test, it just shows you how you speak. And
do you just want to briefly go over the 5 of them?
Absolutely.
Just in case someone's like, what is that?
Right. And so the first one is quality time.
Yep.
It's acts of service.
Physical touch. Words of affirmation.
There you go.
And receiving gifts.
So those are the 5 things. And so when you go to the website, just follow the prompts. It'll show you what to do. One thing that we'll say about this, don't do it together, do it apart from each other. Answer honestly the way that you feel. This isn't a pass or fail.
No.
But what we want you to do with this test is, when you're listening to this with your spouse, maybe listen to it by yourself, is realize that when you're taking and you're talking to each other, and sometimes I do things to that in my love language instead of in Natalie's love language. I'm speaking to her in mine instead of me speaking to her in hers.
That's right. And it caused a lot of frustration.
Just because we we didn't know.
Because we
right?
didn't know.
Right. And so thus this something that a sidebar that we wanted to just have everyone just you take this test. Gary Chapman wrote it. It's been good for years and years. There is 4 basic communication styles that people tend to move towards. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that we hear a lot of time when we're coaching couples through is that we just don't communicate. We just can't communicate.
Right.
We're not saying the same things. Or one is talking and one is listening. And so just as a little bit of a story, think of it this way. Eddie and Janet are frequently getting into arguments that are always resulting in Eddie storming off. Which one's a storm off, you or me?
Me.
Yeah. I tend to just want to deal with it and move on.
Yeah. So, and like, this is not set in stone. If
I've
you're
stormed
the
off.
man, right? Like in this case, and I don't storm off per se. It's more, I need time to process.
Right.
I process off.
Is that what you're going to call it?
That's what I'm processing off.
We just made up a new thing. I'm processing off away from you.
That's right.
Hopefully not with a bad finger coming up as you're doing it.
No.
Right. But so Eddie is storming off and giving maybe Janet or Natalie in this case the cold shoulder. Janet just gets angrier with Eddie. Nothing's getting better when he does this. And despite all the times that they talk about it, how many times he says he doesn't want to talk about it anymore, she continues to have her way and push and poke and stab and prod and gets louder and gets more intense. That feels like that's a me thing.
It is. That feels like it's an aggressive communicator.
I'm more of a stand and fight kind of guy.
Right.
And get
Eddie,
louder and louder if you don't get my point.
It's not determined if he's a passive communicator or if he's a passive aggressive communicator.
Eddie says that he just can't handle it from Janet, that she gets so intense and feels like he just wants to get away from her. Mm-hmm. I can see that being me. Holy moly.
Yes. And we're going to break this down because I think at any given point in 19 years, we've been.
Some of them. Well, and here's the 4 ones that we want to talk about for the next few weeks. 1, it's passive, it's aggressive, it's passive aggressive, and it's assertive.
That's right.
And all of these have their ups and their downs. And so we're just going to hear, would you want to read the first one?
So the first one is a passive communicator. And we're just going to give like a little blurb. And then we'll break them down.
So take the test, the 5 love languages, and then let's get into these.
And then we'll get into these over the next few weeks. Okay, so in a nutshell, the individual avoids naming and asserting their honest needs, their wants or boundaries, and instead they defer to others or prioritize taking care of others in conflict or conversation in order to maintain the peace.
So what you're saying is that they want to assert their own opinion about something because instead of just being dominant and forcing what they think is what is the right thing.
Well, a passive,
they'll just back off.
They'll just, everyone has needs, but neglect my own needs.
Yeah. And personalities like mine that are
bulldoze over those.
I'm a bulldozer, will crush people that are passive.
That's right.
What is it characterized by? Passive communication can be characterized by you have poor eye contact. When you're in an argument, they're kind of slumped over. It's the deferential treatment of others, self-dismissal, self-put-downs. Maybe you've seen this in the mall when you see a husband and a wife talking. And the husband, or maybe it's the wife, but the husband in my case would have been the one that's loud and getting in the face and saying, this is what I want to do. This is how we're going to do it. And the wife is just maybe feeling a little bit like I'm making them feel small. I'm making her feel small.
Yeah. And so then the passive communicator tends to go into that people-pleasing mode.
Right.
And apologize, even though at that moment they might not be needing to apologize.
Speaking softly or apologetically. And the thing about this is, I think, because you are what we call a recovering people pleaser.
Yes, I am.
People with this personality, it's not that this is a bad thing, that they're wanting to help other people and maintain the peace. That's not bad.
That's not bad at all.
In the case of being an overly passive, where you're so passive that you can't express because the person you're with may be unhealthy.
Right. The goal is to be an assertive communicator. That's the healthy.
To be a healthy
communicator.
You can be a healthy passive
because
type of person because the person you're with is willing to accept the fact that, maybe you're a little bit passive or you want to maintain the peace. But because I know that about you, I'm not going to just bowl you over and crush you.
No, but it's also a growing opportunity for me having, if between the 4 styles, the one I was most comfortable in and that I operated in the longest period of time was assertive or Passive.
Wow.
So it's, I know I have feelings, but your feelings matter more. So it doesn't matter how I'm feeling.
So in those moments,
and it's totally manipulative.
well, totally it is. And so when you're saying those things, like, and I'm saying I was the one that was bullying over you, which,
right.
when you're saying, Brian, or trying to like maintain the peace because I'm a jerk, it's because I'm obnoxiously overly aggressive. When you're saying those things and you're saying your feelings mean more, is it because you actually believe that?
If I believe that your feelings matter more,
or you're just doing it because you're just like, I don't want to deal with this.
No, we'll dismiss, right? And I fully know what I'm doing.
Oh, well, that changes everything, doesn't it?
Right? And that's the thing. Like, I'm aware you know what you know.
Yeah.
Right? Or you don't know what you don't know. And so I know that about myself. And so it's a tactic that I have tried to use in the past to get a different result. And so by then playing the victim in the conversation, will that give me the results that I want?
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, no, I know I have feelings and I know that I have thoughts and opinions and my needs matter. I know that, but it's this sort of twisted way of manipulating the conversation in order to get a desired result.
Gotcha.
Right? So it's not healthy whatsoever. There is no healthy passive communicator.
You think
at all.
so?
Healthy assertive, where I'm able to, in a healthy dialogue, express the need that I have, maintain eye contact, and then go from there without falling into that trap of, well, you're right, your needs matter. And I'm just going to stop talking because why do I even bother? It's not like anybody listens to me anyway.
Yeah.
Do you see how it turns from, there's wisdom in learning when to keep your mouth shut.
Right.
That's not what we're talking about though. There's wisdom in not just flapping the gums for every situation and needing to assert yourself in every situation. There's wisdom in knowing when to keep your nasty comments to yourself, right? It's a learned thing.
Right.
So that's not being passive when you're choosing to keep nasty things
to
yourself. I hope that clarifies.
It does. The first one we're gonna dig into, because I think I said at the beginning, being passive I think is okay, and you're saying that it isn't.
No, I don't think being passive is okay at all.
Being a healthy, assertive personality. So the first one is passive.
Yeah, and I'm the most comfortable
in that one,
describing that because that is how I lived for a long time.
Yeah. The next one is aggressive. An aggressive communication type is they're characterized by a person expressing their needs, wants, and opinions and rights. That's a key one. Rights in a way that crosses boundaries with others or of the others that they're communicating.
Yep.
Right. And I can tell you very much for sure, I was the overly aggressive communication type.
Right.
I know people in my life that are part of my family that are overly aggressive communication types, like aggressive types.
Right. And then that in combination with a passive person, you're never going to get anywhere.
No, it's just, you're just bouncing things off. And even what it says is like aggressive communication can be, is by interrupting others, having a low frustration level, like someone talks to you and you're like, oh, I'm done.
Yeah.
Like immediately you're done.
Oh, it's dismissive.
Your attack, it's dismissive. Your attack response is threatened. You call it like puffing up of the chest, and you're striding around, and you're leaving the place of conversation, sneering. You're having a spontaneous outburst loudly over the other person.
Yep.
That's an aggressive style.
And your opinions is expressed as fact. Opinion is not fact.
Right.
Right.
The facts don't care about your feelings.
That's right.
Right. And so, just like even when we talked. I was preaching that message about that outburst I had with Rainin. I was being overly aggressive.
That's right.
And I wasn't. I was just thinking that how I felt was the right way. And this is me having a 15-year-old son, me being married for 19 years, being a leader, and my temper got the best of me in that moment, and I had to apologize. But I was all over the fact that I was right and my feelings were right, and it was like I was justified in what I was saying, but how I said it was real bad. And I was doing a few of these things, pointing fingers, opinions expressed as fact, like that matters, and all of those things. And so,
Danny Silk has a book called "Keep Your Love On." I highly suggest, if you've not read it, to read it. And it talks about connection, communication, and boundaries.
Right.
And so he likens a aggressive communicator to a T-Rex, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Which I think is so fitting. And he also, I think it was Danny Silk that connected the passive communicator to a goat.
Right.
I think it was a goat, a T-Rex, and the chocolate-covered dragon. I love that phrase for a passive-aggressive communicator because they really are chocolate-covered dragons. They're super sweet on the outside, and then you get them behind closed doors or you corner them.
So which leads us to our next one. It's passive, you're aggressive.
Yeah.
Our next communication style that we're going to be talking about in the next few months is you're passive-aggressive.
Yeah.
And what does this mean? It means you appear to be acting on the surface like you're actually
like appropriate.
Yeah. But you're acting out and you're speaking in subtly hostile ways that are crossing the boundaries.
Yeah.
So on the outside, it looks like you're calm and cool and collected and you're saying all the right surface, but in behind closed doors and underneath, you're actually saying things that are just ripping people apart. You're not dealing directly with any issues.
Yep.
You're actually avoiding it. You're not talking about it. Instead, you're actually trying to gather other people around you to be offended with you in that situation. What is that? Kevin Durrell, he's a pastor in the United States. He says, being offended is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die.
Exactly.
And those people that are offended, especially even in a relationship, will try and find friends to set. And this is what a passive aggressive personality will try and do.
Their whole purpose is to control or manipulate the situation without directly dealing with the object of their resentment and frustration. So it's this roundabout way. And I think if we all dig deep, maybe you are this type of a communicator, and all hope's not lost if this is where you fall, but we definitely know people in each of these styles.
You're right.
Of communicating. And so it's characterized like criticism, you statements, you made me feel
is
like this.
Like you statements, but also like always, like the absolute statements. You never do this.
Very passive aggressive. You take a stance of superiority. You dismiss another person's experience. There's resentment. There's a disconnect between what the person says and what they do.
What do we always say? Distance creates distortion.
Yeah.
If you are unhealthy in the way that you approach being in a relationship, in your communication styles, if I can say that properly, if you're struggling to communicate, all you're doing by not learning how to communicate healthily is creating distortion.
Yeah.
And because you're creating distance between you and your spouse.
Yeah.
Right. So we know that we have passive, we have aggressive, we have passive aggressive.
Yep.
The next one is assertive.
Assertive communication is the one that we want to aim towards. It's a healthy way of communicating.
Where you state your wants.
That's right. Your needs. And I advocate for you and your wants and needs. Do you know what I mean? Like we're advocating.
I do vice versa.
That's right. And it's an open, honest conversation. We're not blaming. We're not twisting the conversation. We're not respectful. Manipulative. We're talking in a respectful tone.
Yelling or eye rolling.
Right. We're not crossing
pointing fingers.
Exactly. We're not crossing each other's boundaries.
We're showing each other honesty and grace and willingness to change.
That's right.
And teachability. And
the passive aggressive uses the you statements, and an assertive communicator uses I statements. I feel challenged, or I feel hurt, not you make me feel.
So if you're listening to this, I want you to think back to your last discussion that you had with your spouse. A last big argument, actually. Let's go. Last big argument you had with your spouse. Mm-hmm. Was it filled with you never, you always, those kind of statements, or was it and you were having the conversation with like, I feel this. Doesn't mean that when you say, or I say to you, I feel like you just don't hear me.
Right.
That you're not going to maybe be hurt by that.
Right.
But the fact that you're saying it and like, look, I feel like this is what happened. And you're making space for that argument.
But it's not even, you're making space, I think, at that point for a discussion.
For a proper discussion instead of just yelling back and forth.
Right. And the whole purpose is to explore solutions together.
Right.
Right? Like,
how
we're
many
not...
different things have we tried to communicate to each other?
We've tried so many different tactics. And this one, I mean, obviously, this is why it works.
Right. Absolutely. And so, I mean, it is, when you're assertive and you're healthy assertive, you're communicating clearly.
That's right. You're communicating your needs and your wants clearly and effectively.
So then here's the question, and I'm going to ask all you listeners that are out there today, are you communicating effectively? And so here's the question I want to ask you. Why is communication in marriage so challenging?
Well, I think there's a few reasons. How we were raised, our upbringing, I think, really sort of sets us up for modeling the kind of communication that our parents demonstrated, I guess would be a good way.
Because really, where are you going to
learn that? Because it is a learned skill.
Yeah.
On how to, conflict resolve in a healthy way. How do you problem solve? How do you get to the point where you can communicate what your problem is without manipulating or without talking in circles, right? Like you have to learn these skills. So I think it's hard because it is a learned skill. So depending on your childhood upbringing, I mean, I said earlier, you don't know what you don't know. And
I wish I could say that was mine, but
if you're mimicking an unhealthy way of doing something, then you're not bettering your situation. You're just repeating unhealthy patterns.
So one thing that you've heard us say before in the podcast is that what we're sharing with you are foundations. These are good communication. If you know what your style is, if you begin to understand, take the test and then follow us for the next few weeks as we break these through. But if you know what your communication style is and how you communicate, you actually are in a better position to be able to change that communication style, not because you're changing for your spouse, because you're changing for you.
That's right.
Because now you understand. And the other thing that we always say is that sometimes what you said, like, how do I say it? You grew up a certain way. You learned a certain way. It was modeled to you a certain way.
That's right.
So the things that should be your normal are your exception. Right. So if you're struggling in communication and you have one day or 1 week of really good communication and then you revert back to just the horrible way, it's because your normal is the wrong way to communicate. You can change that communication style. So where that 1 week that you had was like the best communication you and your spouse ever had, you want that, you desire that, you learn what your style is, and you're willing to be teachable to change.
But you have to be open because, when stuff like this is so easy to look across, like I'm sitting across the table from you, it's easy to look across and just be like, like you need to read this. And I've done that when I was reading all those books and things like that years ago, where it was like, I would underline and highlight things that I felt you needed to know to improve yourself. But it was never about me. It was always about trying to fix you.
Right.
So if you're willing to be open and honest about yourself, you know yourself better than your spouse does.
Yeah.
Then I think that there's the catalyst for change.
Yeah.
Is having that open and honest conversation. And if you are one of those unhealthy communication styles, like don't beat yourself up over it.
Yeah.
Right.
Don't let that cripple you into just being,
I'm never like, I guess this is just how I am. Right. There's the I guess that would be the passive aggressive, but,
it's just how I'm going to be.
Right.
Like Eeyore,
whatever.
I'm never going to change.
Eeyore is definitely a passive communicator, but there's always, it's never too late.
Yeah. And even one of the thoughts I had is it possible to improve? Well, absolutely it is.
Yes.
Even what we're saying is that we believe that communication is a learned thing. You said it already. You don't know what you don't know. If you don't know how to communicate better, then you're only going to communicate in what you know how. But the moment someone teaches you how to communicate better, whether it be a coach, like a marriage coach or a counselor or one of your friends or your boss, the moment that you learn something new, now it's up to you to be like, hey, that way is a better way.
That's right. And it takes practice. Yeah. Like we always say, like we want that to be our default setting. Yeah. Where it's effortless. I don't know how to think about it. Yeah. There are times where I'll be like, nope, that's not how I think. And I've had to catch myself mid whatever, be like, that's a really passive way of communicating that. That's not how I'm doing this. I'm and talk myself through the process. And I have done that and I still do that so that I don't fall back into old patterns.
That's not to say that you won't.
No.
Once in a while, like you got to show yourself grace and your spouse.
That's right.
Has to be
like you're on a journey together. But I think acknowledging and being able to recognize when I'm operating out of that place of passive communication,
Yeah.
or whichever one you happen to fall in.
Yeah, absolutely. And like there are three things. Why is communication so hard? We know that it's just a challenge. Why?
Yeah.
Can you actually be a better
Yes.
communicator?
Absolutely.
If you're willing to know something new and to learn something new, you can be a better communicator. And it is very, very important that you're a good communicator in your marriage.
Yes.
It allows, even what we were saying before, the process to work between you. You're
Yeah.
doing it in an assertive way, in a
Right.
healthy way. You're communicating with each other.
And you may be listening to this and not have kids, or your kids have grown, and then you're sort of that voice of influence in your grandkids, or whatever
Right.
it might be, or you're an aunt and an uncle and you're the voice of influence to your nieces and nephews. Somewhere, somebody's looking to you. And so for us, for our children, it was a no-brainer, where the way we were communicating was not working.
Yeah, it was
And
toxic.
so we want to model healthy behaviors and healthy ways of communicating so that we set our children up for the best success. That does not mean that we're perfect, but then that's an opportunity for them to see us resolve conflict in a healthy way.
And I think something just as a side thought that I had is that we coached a couple for quite a long time. And he would always ask, what do I need to do? And I would always say, man, you got to be accountable for you and accountable for the things that you say, the things that you do. Oh, and then, well, I'm changing, or I'm trying these things, but I never see her doing anything. And it's not about your spouse, really. You have to be wanting to change on the inside. But know this, there's going to be little wins and little victories and little losses. There's going to be big wins and there's going to be big losses.
Yep.
But what you can expect is that I've been doing this for a month and I'm not seeing any changes.
Yep.
And we've been married for 19 years. There's some things I'm acing now, and there's some things I'm still blowing.
Yep.
Right. And there's some things that I'm better at, and you can actually see a visible change.
Right.
6 months ago, because I'm like, ooh, I should probably work on this one.
Right. Marriage is a marathon. Marriage is not
A dead sprint.
Right? And I think a lot of times, and maybe it's just the culture that we live in, this fast food society where
Right.
we just
Oh my
want
goodness.
it. We just pull up, we, put our coins
There's an
in.
app
We,
for that.
we want it now.
This app will teach me how to communicate. This app is going to teach me how to be a better
and
husband.
yes, I mean, they can give you all the tools in the world, but you then have to use the tool.
Right.
Right. So it takes work
So
and
you
effort.
go from you don't know what you don't know. You do know you need to change.
That's right.
Because now you know.
That's right.
Right?
Like, you can't hide behind that.
You know what? We're so
It's gonna be-
excited.
So, like, season 2, episode 1. If you're new,
Absolutely.
I don't think we even introduced ourselves. I'm Natalie.
I'm Brian. Wow. But we are excited for the next months to be able to roll into
Oh, yeah. This is
exactly
gonna be great.
what the future is going to look like and what it's going to hold. We do know that the next 4 or 5 weeks of communication, as we break these things down, tear them apart, you may be listening and be like, oh, that's not me. Listen to it anyway. Maybe it'll help someone that you know.
That's right.
But if we pinpoint what you're having and you have just a question that we weren't able to touch on, send us an email, send us a message on
Yep.
Facebook or Instagram. We'd love to chat with you.
That's
And
right.
if you do like this podcast and you are excited that we're back, it does mean a lot to us when you share it and you let people know about the Amplified Marriage Podcast. You can follow us on Instagram and on Facebook. If there is a topic or a question or anything, like we always say, you want to know about and you want us to discuss, email us at amplifiedmarriage@gmail.com. And you've heard us say many, many times, we believe that marriage can be reset,
Refreshed
recharged,
and restored.
Thanks so much for listening.
Talk to you soon.